Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you that may not know me, my name is Professor Will Watts. I'm the co-director of the Veterans Legal Clinic. And I just wanted to start by first just thanking some folks. I wanted to first thank CRS, Williams Institute, Jasleen, and a lot of our other co-sponsors, without whom this event would not have been possible. So thank you so much for all of your help. I also want to thank all of you for coming out today for what promises to be a very inspiring and engaging panel discussion. As clearly a man of color, but also a gay man and someone who's the son of or stepson of a Marine, I am truly looking forward to this panel discussion and finding it very interesting to hear from our panelists. But before we begin, I'd like to just share a little bit about the legal clinic for those of you that don't know much about us. The UCLA School of Law Veterans Legal Clinic began about a year ago, and it is part of the university's larger commitment to assisting veterans and addressing their needs in the community. And the two sort of missions of the clinic are first, of course, to train and continue in the education of our law school students by providing them with an opportunity to work in an actual law office with actual clients, addressing some of their legal needs and giving them opportunities to get exposure to the veterans community in particular. And then the other goal, of course, is to provide legal assistance to veterans in the community and address their unmet legal needs. You all have copies of our annual report, which will give you a lot more details about what we have been up to for the last year. But you'll see that we have been assisting over about 70% of our clients have been people of color. And a significant number of our clients are truly at the margins of justice, the margins of homelessness, at the margins of society generally. So we are there to kind of address their needs, kind of be a solution, be part of the solution, but at the same time advocate on behalf of them. Some of the work we've been able to do is in partnership with the Williams Institute, providing comments to some of the VA regs around providing medical services for transgender brothers and sisters. So we are grateful to be around, and we can definitely talk a lot more about the services we provide and the opportunities for students. I think there are some of our former students and current students here who, along with Professor Patel and I, can share more with you about what we do. But now you don't want to hear that. You want to hear from our panelists. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Professor Patel to introduce our guests. Thank you.
I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of the land. The UCLA Veterans Legal Clinic, Critical Race Studies, and our co-sponsors acknowledge the Tonga people as the traditional land caretakers of the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands. As part of a land-grant institution, we pay our respects to ancestors, elders, relatives, and our community, past, present, and emerging. So I want to also thank Professor Watts for being my trusted partner in developing this clinic and our teaching service and advocacy missions. And also just acknowledge Professor John Barrett and is Christy Hernandez here, who are with the UCLA Veteran Affairs Relations Office, who have been very instrumental in making sure that the clinic gets up and running. Thank you, and thank everyone for being with us here today. The unifying themes for this event include racial justice, civil rights, and human rights. Veterans face disproportionately high numbers of underemployment, exploitation, and homelessness, as well as lack of access to physical and mental health resources that they require. These factors, combined with the silencing of veteran voices and the widespread misunderstanding of veterans' needs and experiences, have contributed to a very high rate of veteran suicides, 20 every day. Now, some may not immediately recognize the connection between civil rights and veterans, yet students of history will remember that the military was the first government agency to desegregate, and several prominent civil rights luminaries fought in World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam. And each of our speakers serves in this legacy. They return to civilian life to become great advocates. So in our time today, each speaker has engaged in military service while also fighting for equality and dignity, both their own and those of other service members. So in our time today, we'll discuss emerging issues within the veterans community, racial justice, sexual assault, LGBT rights, just to name a few. And I think we have to touch on homelessness within the veterans community. LA County has more homeless individuals than any other state in the country. Let me just say that again. LA County has more homeless individuals than any other state in the country. And a disproportionate number, almost over 15%, are veterans. So in the interest of time, I'm going to dispense with lengthy bios because you have them in front of you. But I would like to say a few words just to give us a flavor of the very esteemed panel that you have before you. To my immediate right, we have Deputy Secretary Elizabeth Perez. She's a Californian with Native American and Mexican American roots. She was a Navy combat veteran, or is a Navy combat veteran, but hails from generations of California farm workers, many who also served in the military. She has become a leader in clean energy, and in June 2017 was appointed by Governor Brown to serve as the Deputy Secretary of the California Department of Veterans Affairs as the Minority Affairs Secretary. In the middle, we have Sergeant Tracey Cooper-Harris, who served in the Army, U.S. Army from 1991 to 2003, providing veterinary care for canines in the Army. She has many achievements, one of which is filing a successful federal lawsuit against the Veterans Administration and the Defense of Marriage Act with the help of our friends at Inner City Law Center, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and argued by our very own Adam Romero from the Williams Institute, who, when Adam and I were talking about this event, he said, I have the perfect speaker, and I thought, this is the perfect speaker. So I'm going to turn it over, and then at the end of the table, we have Mia Yamamoto. Now, she has an extremely long and distinguished career as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, including over 10 years at the LA County Public Defender's Office. She has literally founded or grown numerous APA, Asian Pacific American Bar Associations, and has received multiple honors and awards for her achievements. And perhaps most importantly in this group, she is a graduate of the UCLA Law School. So I'll turn it over to our speakers to tell us their untold stories at the margins and intersections of justice. Just a word on format. We're going to have an engaging and interactive conversation that focuses on the experiences of our speakers in service and their advocacy following. So let me just start with an opening question for everyone. And we can start with Mia and then work our way down. Can you share with us what led you to enter the military?
Well, I entered the military. I was 21 years old. I had just graduated college. Like a lot of other transgender people, I was going through gender identity issues, a lot of despair and depression at the time. And I came from a community, the Japanese American community, that actually had a tradition of military service. I won't go into it, but there was the all-Japanese battalion during World War II that actually, I think in my community, felt that military service allowed us to come back out of camp and achieve some measure of equal opportunity because of that, because of their sacrifices. So it was always kind of expected, despite the fact that I was against that war. I didn't like the war, but I always felt, I felt at that time that really didn't matter, that my duty was clear, and it was a matter of honor that I would serve my country. So I went in, they had a deal in those days, because it was a draft, right? The draft, you only had to spend 2 years. If you joined up regular Army, it was 3 years. So I volunteered my draft. I got to go in September, and if I figured if I survived the war, 2 years later I could start grad school.
So I actually joined the service. My parents were overprotective, which if you read into it means strict. I was an only child, and my pop was a big fan of, if you live under my roof, you have to obey my rules, and I said, it's time to go. So I actually talked to an Army recruiter when the first Gulf War was going on, so the one that lasted about 100 hours, and all my friends in high school thought I was crazy for signing up to join the war, and I'm like, it's going to be over in a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. My pop was not a fan of me necessarily going into the military and basically challenged me and said, you're not even gonna last 6 months. And my contract was for 6 years. Not only did I do 6 years, I re-enlisted for another 2 just to kind of go, I can do it. But the other reason I joined the military, my mother was sick, and she had multiple sclerosis. She was diagnosed when I was 8, so she was about 31. And she was progressively getting worse and worse and worse. And I knew that they wanted to send me to college, they wanted me to achieve big things, or as my cousin always likes to point out to me, my mom never wanted me working for peanuts. So I thought that the military would be a good way that my parents wouldn't have to worry about me, that I'd be able to not have to stay under my pop's roof, obey his rules, and I'd be able to get that education and get to travel. And for the most part, it was a pretty good experience. And of course, I had the best job out there. I took care of the military police dogs that detect narcotics, explosives, and basically apprehend bad guys. So it was a win-win.
So I joined the military because actually on my mom's side of the family, which is Mono Indian from Norfolk Rancheria, which is right outside of the Southgate Yosemite, most of my family members on the native side joined. That's just kind of what you did. Although I don't remember actually even to this day if there were any women that joined. That's something I need to find out. On my dad's side, it was just my dad that joined, and he was originally from Jalisco, Mexico. And I grew up an Army brat. I don't know if it was really a brat, but an Army kid. We weren't allowed to be brats. With that, I really had a very military life. It was growing up, I had a drill sergeant dad. We had inspections, and he taught me how to do corners in the side of my bed there. So, and those habits always stuck with me. And a bit of things how I do them today, and that experience growing up is a large part of my of who I am today, and also my experience in the Navy. Actually, part of the Navy was his advice before he passed away, because he knew I wanted to join the military. He says, "Don't go Army, go to the Navy." He's like, "That's much better life." I don't know if anybody here is Army, so sorry about that. Oh, sorry. Well, he said I'd always be by a beach, so, and he was right. He passed away in '95. He was medically discharged in '92, and you know, that was really the saddest part of my life growing up. I mean, I had a pretty relatively happy life. Kind of followed Dad wherever he went. My mom and my 2 sisters. But we knew he was sick. But I think culturally, and also his name was Luis Perez, and every time, and he was known as G.I. Joe. And so he wouldn't say he was sick. And one day he went to the VA hospital when they discharged him, and he never came back. And so that was, you can tell, it's a little emotional for me. But I remember after he passed away, my mom wasn't connected to benefits. Our family wasn't. It was, I want to say, I really don't know all the things that happened, but my mom finally got connected to the VA benefits, the CalVet benefits. We weren't even aware of the CalVet. I know I wasn't, I was a kid, but my mom wasn't aware of the college fee waiver. And during that time too, we did experience homelessness, and we're staying with family, but we didn't have a house. And so we eventually found one, but that always stuck with me. And part of that hardship and wanting to find more, I was the first to finish high school. And that's really all everyone ever told me to do. Just finish high school. Just finish high school. When I finished, I thought, well, there's gotta be more than just this. And so then the military was my answer, really, to that much more and the opportunity for college.
I wonder if you could also just expand a little bit on the issues that your father faced as a non-citizen in the military, and yeah.
Yeah, the most important part. Well, one of the most, when I was 12, I remember my dad studying for his citizenship. And it was a lot of what I was actually studying at the time in elementary. I was in 5th grade. And I asked what he was doing, and he said, well, I'm studying for my citizenship. And I didn't understand. I said, well, you're American. He didn't even tell me. I knew you were Mexican, but I didn't realize that he wasn't a citizen. I always thought Mexican American, because he always says we're American. And actually at that time, and I know I was an 80s kid, in Kentucky. And speaking Spanish isn't really, at that time, I mean, he just didn't teach us. And it's just, I wish, I speak Spanglish now, but then, then it just really wasn't something that he really pushed, and I always wanted to embrace that. But he was studying for a citizenship, and before he was medically discharged, he was able to get a citizenship. But I remember it being very difficult for him, and allowing that, for his command to allow him that time. He had spent 17 years in, and he always said he was a foot soldier. He worked on tanks. He was a combat guy. And he said, I blew up stuff. And so he was always gone, always on deployment. And so getting that time to study and then obtain a citizenship was a bit challenging at times.
Thank you. Now I want to transition to talking a little bit about your time in service. So Tracey, I'm going to start with you. What was it like to serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell? And what was your role in raising the issue and getting the policy change with President Obama?
Wow. So I was actually, when I first came in, there was no Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was, if you're found out, you get kicked out. I don't know how many of you are familiar with MASH, and remember there was one character on there that was Corporal Klinger, who always dressed in drag and women's dresses, and the military actually had something called the Corporal Klinger Clause. It was understood. Basically, if you were just dressing like someone of the opposite sex just to get out, you weren't going to get out. However, if you were gay, there was no, we'll let you slide. If you were found out, you got kicked out. President Clinton made Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which is, the military's not supposed to ask, you're not supposed to tell. The other part of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was you're not supposed to do anything, and the military is not supposed to pursue you. It was, everything was very dependent upon each individual command as far as how lax or how enforceable the law was, which meant it was challenging at the time. My first duty assignment was in Germany, and after I left, there must have been about 10 or 15 people that were kicked out before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There were people who were kicked out, I want to say altogether over the 12 years of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I want to say it was about 1,000 a year that were kicked out. 1,000 a year, up until Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And this was costing us in manpower, and a lot of the folks that ended up getting kicked out, especially in the 90s, were language specialists. So these are the folks that we needed for intelligence, especially our folks who were specialized in speaking Middle Eastern languages and things of that nature. So this would definitely affect our operations tempo, security, and things of that nature. I basically survived Don't Ask, Don't Tell by, and this is going to sound really bad, but basically by looking at it as a game. I'm in my early 20s, and basically I had friends, male friends of mine, who acted as, a beard, if you will. And basically that's someone who, gay or straight, and they will just pretend like they're your significant other. While I had, significant girlfriend or whatever. There were maybe a handful of people that I told when I was on active duty. But besides that, it was a very hard life. I had to look at it as playing a game just so I could make sure that I could stay doing the job that I really loved and enjoyed. What ended up happening is during that first year in Germany, I ended up getting blackmailed by a few of my so-called friends. They found out and basically made me do some things to make sure my secret quiet. A few of my other friends knew about it, but we never really said anything about it just because that was just how life was at the time. I wanna say it was in 2010, another organization reached out to me. I wanna say it was Outserved Service Members Legal Defense Network. And I basically put it to them and said, you know, are you guys really gonna do anything to help repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell? And they said, actually, we will. Would you be willing to write a letter? I said, who am I writing the letter to? President Obama. I'm like, he's not gonna listen to me. So I wrote a letter to President Obama, and basically saying, you know what, I was coerced into some pretty bad stuff when I was still 19 years old. And it should not be, the bigger issue should not be for my, who I love versus the military camaraderie, esprit de corps, trust, and sexual harassment, sexual assault. The bigger issue is punishing those men who decided, hey, we're gonna take advantage of this kid over this situation. And because of that, that might have been one of the things that kind of got President Obama to decide to change the laws for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but I didn't really understand the impact of it. I got rid of cable a long time ago because we're cheap. And one of my cousins and an aunt in South Carolina called me up, and apparently Anderson Cooper picked up the story. And they said, did you see this? I'm like, see what? And all of a sudden, here's my name, my little picture on there with the military working dog in my desert uniform. And, you know, Sergeant Tracey Harris wrote a letter to President Obama. I'm like, wow, okay. I didn't tell anybody in my family what happened. And so, you know, my aunt reached out to me and basically, baby, why didn't you tell us what happened? I said, my pop side of the family, they are very protective, like I said before. And they have been known to go out and try to hunt people down if they do anything wrong to anybody on our side of the family. I said, we don't need that while I'm still active duty in the military. So that's why this didn't come out for many years after I had long been out of the military, but they wanted me to know that they still loved me and appreciated me and things like that. So we are very lucky, blessed, fortunate that that law is not in existence anymore. And, you know, I have to take my hat off to the folks that came before me, who are the pioneers leading the way, the folks in the entire LGBT community, the allies, everybody like that. Because if it wasn't for them talking to, you know, folks higher up in the community in the chain of command, you know, we still actually might be stuck with that law today.
I want to turn next to Mia. So Vietnam is distinct from our current series of conflicts in the Gulf region for many reasons. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, your sense of community during your time of service, and your own sort of anti-war stance?
Yeah, well, first of all, I remember people telling me the same thing about the Navy. She joined the Navy because the Viet Cong ain't got no submarines. There's some very rational reasons to actually. You were drafted into the Navy. I will say this about my own experience being trans. I mean, it was totally stealth when I was that age. You know, I don't think I'd ever even really seriously cross-dressed in public, certainly, at that age. So I did recognize that you were right. If you came out, you were kicked out. That's the way it was when I was there too, especially. But it was a lot more hatred, I thought, a lot more bigotry and hatred towards gay people, and absolutely no tolerance for transgender people. So that was the place that we were. But you know, the honest truth about it was that the draft actually made, I thought, the Army a lot more human. Because these were people that were taken straight out of society, had no intention of staying there. And all of us had different plans to do what we were going to do when we got out. And I was the one that advocated for a volunteer army also at the time, and I'm really waffling on that now. I think, as a matter of fact, and you may hate me for this, but I think universal conscription is actually something that, as long as it was a nonviolent alternative to do it, is a humanizing force, and actually something that actually increases one's patriotism, because one finds about people from all over the country. You're just thrown together, and you are forced to confront different cultural traditions and values. And I thought that the draft actually humanized the military, and to some extent now, it's much more like a police force because it's voluntary. And a lot of the people are not really committed to being citizen soldiers. They're much more committed to being professional soldiers. And it's a different culture, it's a different, just a different vibe all the way through it. And it would be a lot less desirable for me to go in at this time. I mean, I have to say, I like that part of it. Let me just caveat and say this, I'm not gonna advise anybody to go into the military, sorry about that. Because I feel like I have trouble with war in particular, but I have trouble with glamorizing and glorifying war in any possible way. And a lot of the military has got that going right now with respect to the ads that they pay for with the National Football League and things like that, trying to get people to use that as an alternative. The military is fine if that's really what you're into and that's really what you want to do, but it really is laid down to people who are, again, going through difficult economic or social circumstances, and they're sort of sent there. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be inclusive in a very open way, and that's what I have against the so-called transgender ban. Of course, on one level, I think, yeah, keep me out of there, the corporal Klinger rule. But at the same time, we have a contribution to make. We have something to add, and we would like to defend our country in time of war. The people in my community are patriotic, and the real problem I have with all these anti-gay and anti-trans policies is that they are trying to make all the achievements, the accomplishments, and contributions of that community completely invisible. They would like to wipe out all the good things that have been done by the people from this community. And I can tell you, anybody who's been in the military can tell you, there's tons of gay and lesbian people in the military. They're already there. They've been through a period of time when everybody's got to be underground, so you don't find out about each other to some extent. You really have no intention of having people find out, whether they're gay or straight or whatever, because you can be blackmailed. That was always one of the things that you would worry about, is you got a secret. And that's the really bad things about having a secret. And that's one of the secrets that I would like to make sure that our panel and a whole lot of other panels make that secret completely unnecessary. That you don't have to have that secret. You can be completely authentic, open, and speak and live your truth, whether it's in the military or any place else. And there should be no barriers to those places and to those services because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. So from that point of view, I like to say that my experience has helped me in terms of my advocacy, because I recognize who's there, and I recognize that those people need a voice, and they need advocates, people that will write letters and bring lawsuits and do the kinds of things that we need to do in order to fight back against LGBT bigotry, against the kind of hatred that is visited upon people, the irrational hatred. And I also have the position that I think that just about every total homophobe is probably a closet queen to begin with. Everything I've seen about that is true, so they need to disavow that type of stuff as well. They're not doing very well with that burden on their heads.
I would like to ask Deputy Secretary Perez to take us a little bit more macro. She has been having lots of conversations with minority veterans organizations across the state, has been elevated to this really prominent position. And I would love to know a little bit from you, what can you tell us about the issues and experiences of minority service members in the military, and then we'll talk in a bit about sort of challenges in reintegrating and following.
Sure. So I was appointed January of this year, and I'm rolling into my 10th month here. And I have my reasons why I joined the military, and it's true. It's socioeconomic disparities. It was, at that time, I didn't see it as such, but I thought, well, it's more opportunity. And but really, in reality, I was living in poverty, and my story isn't quite that different compared to other minority kids or folks that want to join the military. A lot of that is, of course, for more opportunity, but I'm taking a look at being the Deputy Secretary for the Minority and Underserved population of veterans. Let's start there. So underserved means LGBTQ vets, Native American veterans, women minority vets, and the population as a whole of minority veterans. So out of 1.8 million veterans in the state, that's 44% of our veteran population. It's about 774,000. It's quite a bit of veterans to oversee. And with that, and I'll be very candid here, with our division being established in 2011 within the state, federally on the minority side, it was, their side was established on the minority piece was in 1994. So it took a little while to get there. And I think as our population's growing, and right now, I think we're in competition with Texas and having the largest amount of veterans, minority veterans and underrepresented vets and for the nation, yes. And so with that, taking a look at why are 44% of the homeless veterans nationwide are predominantly Black and Latino. Why are women minority vets have a higher rate of suicide? I know within the State Department and federal, we don't like to talk about that, but it's something we said that's happening. And also, the homelessness is an issue, and I know here in Los Angeles especially is, and in San Diego it is as well. And why is this happening? Why also, there's a lot of these questions as I was traveling the state too. Why is there a disconnect between Native American vets and not getting connected to their benefits and services at high numbers? Also, what I've learned too is Black veterans as well are in that same category. And what I found is, and I'll just kind of throw some of the things I found since the past 10 months, and the number of CVSOs that are out there, and the CVSO is the County Veteran Service Officer. There's about, there's 58 counties and roughly over 200 or more plus, and I'll have the exact number of CVSOs. There's a very low number, and I want to say 5 possibly, that are Black CVSOs. And what I'm hearing roughly.
Can you just explain the role of a CVSO within service, within?
Okay, sure. So they're certified by the Veterans Affairs to be able to, they have a background check, they have a, they basically have everything on that veteran's history, that file, their DD-214, and they're able to process that veteran's claim. So whether it's a new claim or a claim to increase their disability. And this is an economics issue too, because that means they're getting medical assistance. That means that disability, they can get a pension, a medical pension monthly. And just on a personal level for me, during the recession, I found myself homeless. And I was pregnant, 5 months pregnant, and I had a 6-year-old, and I was in a Motel 6 off the 5 near Levelland in San Diego. And I remember that. I'm thinking, how did I end up here? I was there when I was a kid, now I'm here now. I transitioned out, and I'd say about 2 years afterwards, there I was, maybe close to 3. And I worked my butt off to get out of that. But I mean, I understood it on that level. And what I'm getting to is there's gotta be a trend. There's a trend and there's reasons behind this. And what I was getting to is the socioeconomic disparities. And then what I've also found during my journey and then connecting the dots is also ACE. Has anybody heard of ACE? Adverse Childhood Experiences. And those adverse childhood experiences, if you've had those experiences as a child growing up, you're more likely to have, say, cancer or heart disease or experience homelessness or poverty or PTSD. And so where I'm getting at is if that member, if that person does join the military, it can be compounded. And you see where I'm getting at? It can be compounded. So when I'm trying to connect those dots, and what I'm lacking is more of that evidence and more of that research that puts those pieces together. And I will, because I know we have other speakers as well, but I will stop here. Part of that ACE is also generational PTSD. And so veterans, we do experience PTSD as combat vets. Not all of us, but the majority of us do. But that is compounded if you're a Black veteran and if you're a Native American veteran. And the reason is because that generational PTSD has been scientifically proven that has been woven into the DNA through generations. And so it can be compounded. And there's actually studies I found from the VA in the early 90s from the original Gulf War, or the first Gulf War I should say, in the 90s. That was the last study they did. from after the first Gulf War, and that they were studying veterans from the Vietnam War. So the veterans in the Vietnam War that are Black and Native American were less likely to want to be involved, or there was some hesitancy and there was a lot of guilt because they felt that this is similar to what happened to their people. And actually, and back to on a personal note, when I was overseas, I felt the same way, and I thought, oh my gosh, I thought that was just me, as I related to that. So, yeah, there's just a lot there, but what I was mentioning to the professor is that there is a new generation of research that needs to happen. And taking a look at what the VA's produced, there is a minority report that was produced last November, but those were studies back in 2014, and nothing before that. It's been pretty vacant. I looked on our websites. There's stuff that's on there, but it's from, I'd say, the 90s, around that time frame. And then also there's the American Indian Report that was also produced. It was released last year, but that information was gathered in 2014. So there is a new generation of research that needs to be out there. We have a lot of the veterans that we're seeing. Yes, there's problems, and only in the next 20 years that population of veterans is going to continue to grow. So instead of being reactive and throwing out money and programs, we need to really understand, get down to the level here where we're understanding how can we really be more proactive.
Thank you all. So now we're going to talk a little bit about your advocacy and sort of reintegration challenges coming back from service. And then I'm going to open it up for audience questions. So Mia, let me start with you. And in your decades and long legacy of criminal defense and private practice, what issues do you see service members facing within the legal system, but particularly if you could focus on the criminal justice system, and if you can also focus on if there are any particular issues for homeless vets that you've seen?
I just wanted to cite one anecdote, actually. My dad was a lawyer. When we went to camp, he used to go around the camp saying, you know, I'm a lawyer, I read the Constitution, they can't do this to us. They can't put people in prison because of their race. And of course he was wrong. And when I was in Vietnam, I actually read the autobiography of Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was one of these guys, he had fought the Japanese, he kicked out the French and everybody else out of Indochina. And he sent letters to Truman saying, I read your Constitution. I know that you guys fought off imperialism and colonialism, and I know you're going to be on the side of us because the French are trying to recolonize Vietnam. And I remember thinking, this guy was so misguided. He didn't realize how much race matters in just about everything. And that race matters in terms of who you go to war against, who you don't favor. I just want to talk about the military itself, and you'll find this in every bureaucracy you come across. Like I said, it was the first meritocracy, the first desegregation. My time in the military, I saw a lot of racism, I saw a lot of sexism. I thought people don't get promotions, people don't get the assignments they want, people get combat assignments based on, to some extent, race. Well, I worked in awards and decorations, which was really interesting, and I saw how phony the whole bit is. If you're a high-ranking officer who does the same thing that some poor PFC, especially if that PFC is black, you will get a higher rated award. That guy will get maybe nothing, maybe he'll get an ARCOM, Army Combination Medal, you'll get a Silver Star. If you're a general, it's even worse, but you cannot look at what happened in that war and not conclude that racism was afoot every place. But again, it was the 1960s when I was there, and that's something that we were highly aware of. It was something that we were fighting against at the time, we're still fighting against it today. And those intersections of being a minority person, a gay person, a black person, a woman, any one of these intersectional elements can increase the level of oppression you're getting from different angles of a particular milieu, whether it be a bureaucracy or even a battalion, even on a micro level. All these things show themselves because, and I say this just my little bit of a word from our sponsor, here, you guys will lead the way with respect to this. You're the ones that we're counting on to continue this anti-fascist, anti-racist, all these elements that have so much momentum because they started so long ago and they have so much inertia going for them. They are somewhat monolithic, but My dad lived long enough to see Brown versus the Board of Education. My dad was a member of the NAACP, and he was a member of the ACLU because they were the only people that would hire a Japanese person after the war. And by the way, speaking Japanese was not cool after World War II. I can tell you, coming back to the hood after getting out of jail, and then speaking that language was not the kind of thing that was going to endear you to your neighbors. So I understand that process as well. So I'm just saying a word from my sponsor. I want all of you to understand that the civil rights movement and this movement for social justice and human rights, we're counting on you. You're the law students, you're the smart ones, you're the active ones, you've got motivation, you've got passion. We're counting on you, so thank you very much. That was a word from the sponsor. Let me talk a little bit about the experience.
Well, I was just gonna just throw back also the question of, in your experience as a criminal defense attorney, what have you seen in terms of the trends for veterans? But
Well, I mean, the veterans, believe me, when veterans first came back right after the Vietnam War, we were not a favored class of people. I mean, this is ancient history in a lot of ways, but people were not touting veterans. People didn't like us very much. They kind of blamed us for all the atrocities that the government was inflicting upon Southeast Asia. So it was not a popular thing. We had to basically, I first came to this class, you could only hang around veterans. That's the only people that wanted to hang around with you, actually, when I was going here. It changed over the course of time. I like to think that they eventually understood that we're human too, and that we could be okay despite whatever sins we carried upon our souls coming into law school. But I think that a lot of people, not me in particular, but we tried to elevate the issue of veterans in society, about veterans and addiction, veterans and PTSD, because these were new issues at the time. Nobody even called it PTSD when we first got out of Vietnam. It was called combat fatigue. It was called other different words, and they were meant to show that people came out of the military. And it is a form of mental illness, and like I said, not everybody gets PTSD. Everybody goes through the same stuff. Everybody has some residual feelings and displacements and some disorientation and dysphoria that comes from combat and being involved in an immoral activity, which is, mass murder. I think it's really difficult for people to reconcile that with a new life. We're trying to come back and be just another normal citizen looking for a job. And all these things we talk about, homeless veterans, everybody else, no question, racism has a lot to do with that. Homophobia, transphobia has so much to do to limit the options of people who are coming out of the service. It exists, it's institutional, it hasn't been eradicated. Again, we're counting on you guys. And it's just another element that one has to consider when you look at the plight of an individual that comes to your clinic, whoever that person is. The forces of the history that have been inflicted upon that person need to be taken into consideration when you're dealing with holistic law practice, client-centered law practice, looking at all the very different aspects and dimensions of not only where this person comes from, but what's possible. What is possible for you to help this person and to make their life better? All those things have to take into consideration that person's experience with the military. Some people feel very betrayed by the whole process, by what they were promised, and I don't blame them, because they'll promise you the world. I know something about recruiters and what kinds of lies they tell people.
Wow.
Come on, they all know this stuff. And so I feel like you need to understand where they come from in terms of the multiple trauma that they've been experiencing, and then what changes they're faced with and confronting when they come to civilian life. I think if you can just start with that, then you can start the conversation with the veteran and start them from the very beginning and start moving it towards what can we do to help you.
I wanted to just add in there too, not just on the race side, but social, economic disparities. You can be any color. And just your life experience, you can be from Tennessee, Kentucky, Oklahoma, California, whatever. And just that life experience, and then going back to that after service, you left to get that new opportunity, that opportunity. But if you're going back to your hometown or a new town, you may not have the tools in your toolbox to go out and do the things you want to do, because you're limited
Oh, yeah, I mean,
in
come
those
on.
ways.
If you're a machine gunner, how many jobs are there for you out here when you come back? Or you're a really specialized weapons person, I just don't see how that translates very well to the workforce.
And I grew up in a really small town in South Carolina, and I knew a lot of folks from my high school who went into the military, and you could really see the distinction when people came home, if they had a support network, if they were middle class or in a lower socioeconomic status in terms of opportunities for them, and then also how they dealt with the trauma that they were experiencing, the risk of suicide, or start getting kind of caught up in the criminal justice system. And I think that that's not necessarily something that, as a civilian, we would understand or know. There's sort of a stigma to ask about time in service. I had a really close friend who was in service, and we didn't really talk about it, right? So I think just as a person who's more living as a civilian and not a former service member, I mean, it's just something to acknowledge, and it's just something that's kind of a part of the divide around folks who, as an attorney representing veterans as well.
I wanted to add
I'm sorry.
one quick thing in there. I know that this was an issue for a lot of friends and family when they first came home and they were looking for employment and looking for jobs. I know especially with female veterans, a lot of us would not put down that we were in the military or kind of hid it, because when you did put that on there, oh, I didn't know women could do that. Or, even better, you couldn't have done this because you were in the military, or they were worried about the stigma. Oh, you must have PTSD. Oh, that means you might go postal. No, postal employees go postal. A veteran with PTSD, they're more likely, unfortunately, to harm themselves than you. So this is part of the conversation that you're having, making sure that we're bridging that military and civilian divide, because, veterans were basically, we have the same good and bad attributes as anyone else. They're looking for jobs, they're looking for work, they're looking to reintegrate themselves back into society. And what they don't need is to basically be pigeonholed into, oh, I can't hire them because they're gonna be a liability, they're gonna be an asset. We want them to make sure that everything that they're doing, even as a gunner, a tank or whatever, there are skills that these young men and women are gonna have that will translate very well into corporate. And there are some organizations that have made that and done that transition well, but there are unfortunately some that just wanna go around with blinders on.
I just want to say one thing. We lose more people to suicide than we do to combat, and it's a lot more. So we're talking about post-discharge, caring about people and caring about taking care of them is a huge problem. If that's the case, people deliberately trying to kill you are way more outweighed by you killing yourself. Then we know that we're not doing our job as a society and bringing back these people and allowing them to reintegrate and to figure out some way to get their senses back and their perspective back and their optimism back. All those things are a bigger problem than the people who are in the military right now, apart from the discriminatory issues. Taking care of these people after their discharge is highly important and in many ways more critical.
That was great. So I'm gonna open it up in just a moment. I wanted to let Tracey talk about the litigation that you're involved with, which is, Tracey told me that she got involved in the litigation through her attorney at Inner City Law Center, who connected her with Southern Poverty Law Center, and then it went from there. So what led you to decide to move forward?
Well, basically, I had a friend of mine who was one of those rebel rousers, if you will, and said, "Hey, you're married. Go ahead and sign up for VA benefits." And I'm like, "There's no way. They're not going to recognize it." My catalyst for filing the lawsuit, I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It is a neurological condition of the brain and central nervous system. It can affect any system in the body because it's nerves. The best way to put it is, if you turn on the light in this room, let's say the light might be delayed in coming on, it might turn on a shredder down the hall, or it might turn on something in a totally different part of the building. There is no certainty with MS, and it usually strikes people usually between 20 and 50 years of age. I got word that I might have probable MS. I freaked out because, if you remember earlier, my mom had MS. I grew up with watching her go downhill pretty rapidly. That was my normal. I didn't understand that when a person has MS, it's that person's MS, and everybody's MS is different. So I freaked out a little bit, ended up getting with the Inner City Law Center, who made sure that I had VA benefits. But the thing is, when I was making sure I got my will, my power of attorney and stuff like that together, I wanted to make sure that my wife was gonna be able to get any benefits afforded to her from my military service, and I found out that no. The running joke at the time with my good friends was, if I died, go ahead and bury me, and then have one of my good friends' kids go behind my marker and chisel Maggie's name in after I'm gone to, and put her, and we'll bury her with me, type of thing. Which was, like I said, you have to make light of these things. Unfortunately, military, we have a warped sense of humor, so. I said, we gotta fight this. I'm sick. I don't know how long I'm gonna have. Knock on wood. I'm still okay. And we ended up reaching out to a whole bunch of law centers, law groups, everything else. Didn't get any feedback from anybody, and reached out to Southern Poverty Law Center. And the young lady answered the phone and said, "Darling, you just go ahead and write out all this, send us an email, somebody get back to you." I thought she was blowing me off. Somebody got back to me in 48 hours. They reached out to me, checked me out, made sure I wasn't that crazy. And they said, "Wow, this is something that we would love to take up. This is nothing but an extension of our case that we basically had in front of the Supreme Court back in 1973, Frontier versus Richardson. And we would love to take this case." So thanks to Southern Poverty Law Center and a few other law offices, including Adam's right here, we were able to file that complaint against the Department of Veterans Affairs. When our case was going forward, there were only basically the Bipartisan Legal Advisory Group, or BLAG, actually had there were dozens of federal lawsuits challenging the Defense of Marriage Act in whatever aspect. They're at the federal level, state level, whatever. And the BLAG group basically said, "We want all those cases to be stayed." I'm gonna work with all lawyers. They wanted to stay all those cases except for the two that were before the Supreme Court. Our federal judge basically said, no. So in addition to the Windsor case and the Perry versus, they changed the name. Yes, thank you. Those two cases plus ours were the only ones that were active in federal court. While, during this whole time, the Supreme Court made a decision. After the Supreme Court made their decision in Windsor and with Perry, they basically said the folks who were bringing Perry to the Supreme Court had no standing, so yay, win anyway. And Windsor, of course, was, it knocked down section 3 of DOMA, so it was more of the federal aspect of it. So federal had to recognize, if the state said the marriage is legal, the federal government had to provide those federal benefits. And because of that, the judge in our case basically said, yes, because of that, you guys will now have standing as well, and so we won that lawsuit, and it was 5 years ago. Back in August, so that was pretty incredible to be on that. We actually also got to meet Frontier versus Richardson. I have friends of mine that are actual lawyers, and they were like, "You got to meet Jan Frontier." So, and I guess that you guys actually study that in case law just because of how important it is for the dependency issue. And the reason why Southern Poverty Law Center took our case was because they said that the right of a spouse can be either a man or a woman, and they're like, we already decided this, like, basically the same year that I was born. So, yeah, we're taking this fight up, so just, thank you to Southern Poverty Law Center and everyone else involved in the case for that. That was, we were glad we were able to do it, and now veterans just have to wait the same normal amount of time that everybody else does at the VA.
Which is an average of
2 years.
Well,
or more?
when did you file? Sorry.
So we filed back in 2012.
Yeah, so then it was 2 years. I was in the same boat. It took me 2 years too.
Now the delays are.
About 6 months to 2 months.
So let's give our, we're gonna open it up. We have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, but first I wanted to give Christian an opportunity to just stand up and talk about the clinic a little bit. And I just wanted to reiterate again that in LA County, homeless veterans are very disproportionate in the percentage of homeless individuals, and you can't drive to work or to school without noticing the crisis that we're in right now. I mean, as renters, we know there's an affordable housing crisis. We can't, but I'll let you definitely. And so we can't ignore the encampments and the individuals that are on the sidewalks. And the UCLA legal clinic is part of solving the crisis. Veterans have been invisibilized and pushed aside. Our speakers have talked about that in many of our progressive and mainstream civil rights and human rights conversations. Some students and some people have asked me, even as a longtime civil rights advocate, why are you spending your time? Why should we spend our time as law students serving this community? And I would just say that I'm honored to be part of developing this legal clinic through direct services and policy advocacy. And this is an extremely vulnerable and marginalized community. And I know that this panel has helped to illuminate those issues. And I really encourage you to consider taking the Veterans Legal Clinic. And I'm gonna let Christian talk about that. Give a little 1 minute, 2 minutes.
So I'll plug it real quick because they cover everything much better than I do. But it's, as they covered, a really, really heavily underserved community, and the clinic is super great, I guess, from a student's perspective, because it kind of gives you a lot of experience in 2 avenues. One, there's really the advocacy avenue with kind of the ticket style stuff in court, the quality of lifestyle ticketing, but you don't get the chance to actually practice in a lot of clinics. And 2, there's the more technical legal avenues of appealing benefits cases, which is a really kind of complex area of law that it's really challenging and really great to learn about, and has a lot of really applicable skills. So really worth it for anybody. It's 6 credits too, and I know that the period for applications is closed, but I'm sure they'll happily take more applications if you haven't applied.
It's reopening next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, so you can start now.
Any questions?
Oh, my question is for Elizabeth, and I'm Amanda. I'm an attorney at Public Counsel
Yes.
Center for
Thank you for
Veterans.
being here.
So we are developing clinics for underserved, minority veterans in rural areas. And when we come into trying to work with these populations, a lot of these vets have bad papers, and that they, there aren't LGBTQ centers for, minority vets to go to. What is the, state doing to reach out to these veterans? Because when we get there, they're like, we don't even know there's legal help out there beyond a VSO. So what is the state's kind of plan to reach out to these kind of more rural, vulnerable vets?
I'm gonna take Aaron's question as well, and then.
Oh, I just, I got out 2 years ago, and I noticed, I was lucky because I had a plan going forward. I came from a relatively privileged background, but I noticed that, there was a lot lacking with the military itself and how it transitioned a lot of soldiers out of the Army, and I actually thought about Mia's comments too, that this is more of a professional force, and I felt that, when I was in, people who wanted to become, be that citizen soldier were kind of just pushed aside, and that was something you had to figure out on your own. And what can the military do when soldiers are trying to transition out of the military to kind of improve that?
If the military wanted to, they could give you training, but they don't want to, because they would like to keep you. They don't want you to actually have an avenue out. They would like to have a door that swings one way. And so I just see them as sort of cynical in terms of like, why should we train you to work as a civilian? I can think of a jillion reasons, and all of them related to the suicides of soldiers who have gotten out. But it seems to me that it takes an entire enraged citizenry to make them provide that training for people who are transitioning out.
Sure, sure. So is it Megan? Amanda, sorry. So I'm glad you said you're from public counsel, because there's work that we're doing with public counsel, I'm not sure if you're aware of. It's it's a little off topic, but I'll go into the LGBTQ that paper piece. So with legal counsel, here in Los Angeles, the state has contracted legal counsel through the California Department of Social Services to help us with the deported veterans issue.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you're aware, we're the only state in the nation that has, that's finding a way and also provided legal help for deported veterans. I don't know if you knew that, but that's as of this year, as of this March. And also as of this March, we have, within CalVet, we have the Pathway to Citizenship program for veterans and their family members who are stateside. So we're also the first in the nation. And when I stepped in this role and putting that together, I didn't realize we were the first of anything. I just wanted to do it. I felt that it was really important. And actually, in talking to our leadership in Sacramento, they weren't even aware how, and also VA, I should add, in DC, they did not have, excuse me, they did not have numbers on the deported veterans. And they thought that possibly, at most, there was 5 to a dozen.
Wow.
What?
Yeah, and I didn't say that out loud, but yes, I was actually, that was my reaction.
The LA
And-
Times reports more than that in a month.
Yeah, so there weren't numbers, and they were talking January of this year. And we were taking a look at, okay, yeah, well, there's a lot of things I can't, I'm an appointee. So, taking a look at that and working with different organizations and actually really cracking the code and to that number, what it could be out there, was Hector Barajas. Have you had a chance to meet him at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So he really opened that door in May, and with the, oh my gosh, what am I trying to remember? Oh, the house, and I can't remember the name of it. It's
The
like
Veterans Board House, the Veterans House and the other one.
the Deported Veterans House, but there's like a bunker house, the bunker. So, and then that opened the door to, well, using social media, we found the U.S. deported veterans of Africa, of Germany, and Canada, and, just, Korea, and yeah, it's just really all over the globe. And right now, we're taking a look at, over 135 in just a short time frame. So in March, we started the Pathway to Veteran Citizenship for the veterans and family members stateside. In May, that's when we actually officially started, well, unofficially, are assisting deported veterans. And it's very low-key, undercover, we don't advertise it. It's just something people, veterans contact me through CalVet social media, through Messenger. They find me on my deputy secretary Facebook page or my private Facebook, and I'll take them all. And that's how I connect with them, or they look at, it's just all word of mouth. Or some got deported and they came back and they're undercover in the US, and there's like 25 of those. And actually there's a case I'm taking a look at now where we have 5 brothers, 4 of them are about to be deported, but the mother was born in New Mexico. I'm not sure how that happened. So I'm
Well, US citizens get deported, that's how that happens.
well, there's a lot of US citizens that got deported, and well, if we wanna talk offline, I can do that. And I'm happy to share that information, but, yeah, that has happened. And also, people think, well, they're criminals, they should get deported. Well, I would say, taking a look at the population I work with, about a good 90 to 95% have PTSD. And if you take a look at veterans with PTSD, they typically result in addiction, drugs, alcohol, they make bad decisions, but usually there's veterans court. But if you're a veteran that is not a citizen, guess what? You're getting deported, and it's automatically a federal offense. Back to your question on the bad paper. I think I mentioned in the beginning that I may have, no, I don't believe I did. So we started this minority underserved division in 2011, and unfortunately, appointees doesn't exactly mean you're guaranteed this position. So if there's new leadership, then what I'm getting at is there's high turnover. And with that high turnover, not a lot of things get established. So I'm trying to really work like a double time right now. Anybody in the military know double time? And working double time, meaning, yes, I'm aware of the bad paper, but I wasn't aware of that, bad paper issue until this summer. And I am working heavily with LGBT groups, mostly in SoCal right now, in NorCal, mostly San Francisco area. And we have an event in San Diego coming up the third week in January with the LGBTQ North County Center, which is gonna be like more like a SoCal wide, but to really get the word out. So I would like your help on that, if you're able to. But I think really kind of spreading myself out there and being able to do that would be great.
Any questions?
I served in the Army for 4 years, and I'm currently a commander in East LA of a unit out there. And this is more like a plea to you, Elizabeth. So a lot of my soldiers, we're a reserve unit, so unlike the active duty component, essentially they get called up for these tours of service, which over the last 20 years have increased immensely. And when Mia was in the Army, they didn't call up reserves to go to Afghanistan, Iraq, or whatever we did.
Sometimes.
Yeah, not to the extent.
It's not as widespread as today, but you're right, they did some.
Because the Army's been making up a lot of its manpower there, and some of my soldiers are living at home, their only income is the reserve, then they get called up for a year, they serve overseas in combat, and then they come back, and they never had employment to begin with, and now a lot of them have trauma of various sorts, and it's very difficult to help those soldiers, because they don't have a job that's protected by law, you know, they might have been living at home, now their family won't let them live at home anymore, and there's just no real resources for them outside of, oh, go be homeless in the VA parking lot and get the free healthcare from them. And that's just like not the right answer, so that's,
They had a
as
whole
I said,
unit
more
of
of
the
a
California Air National Guard. I remember thinking that was the weirdest thing to see in Vietnam, was a plane, California Air National Guard. I remember thinking about those dudes, and they're probably going through exactly that same thing.
Yeah, and actually that was part of reading the minority report too. Well, it's veterans as a whole, reserve veterans, and yes, the VA federally is aware of that. State, we're also aware of that. But I can talk to you offline. Is there a solution right away? I don't have one, but working with different organizations to try to find those individualized situations. That's triaging it, and that preventative piece I was talking about in the beginning, that's the things that we need to understand. Why is it PTSD? Why are the high homeless rates and suicide rates and XYZ? And those are the things. And the VA does have to have, that they're gonna deploy our reserves and exponentially more so than the active. There
They gotta
needs to be
fulfill
some,
their promises.
right,
And take care of people.
Yeah, and
yeah.
unfortunately with the VA, because I ran into this, there was a young reservist who came to the VA and needed help. If you have not completed your term of active duty, meaning for the VA, that's 2 years, as you're well aware of, then you are not eligible for VA benefits.
Yeah, it has to do with whether you qualify
Yep.
under the definition of a quote-unquote veteran. Which for people who've taken our clinic, we've seen that in a problem in our intake. I just wanted to, before we end, I wondered if any of you wanted to say a word about military sexual trauma, because it's been in the news, it's an epidemic in the military right now, whether, not necessarily from your personal experience, but just how what is it? How pervasive is the problem? What advocacy can be done by any of us?
I think it's a community-wide problem, that, disrespect and disparagement of women, and the idea that somehow or other they're there for the men's use, and I think that, let me just say that, I think that we're not doing enough clearly. And putting people like Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court is not setting a very good example for the ways that we need to treat women in the workforce. So I think it has to be a much more widespread community, society-wide campaign to elevate the rights and issues of women and the place of women with respect to that. Because one thing that those hearings brought out was how widespread it was, how much victimization, how many survivors are out there, and how many people are waited so many years before they're able to reveal it. And it's just like don't ask, don't tell. You're carrying around this burden along with you, and it's really unhealthy. But people do it because of things like shame, and they don't want to get slut shamed and all other sorts of things that was done to that poor doctor. And I see it as a very pervasive problem, and it does come with impunity. And I see it with police officers as well as sometimes with military people. Sometimes when you're giving power, particularly with such a thing as male hegemony, which exists in the military, regardless of what you want to do to try to reform it, impunity rises its ugly head. And the idea that it gets condoned by the government is an example that makes it even worse for all of us. So I think that we all have to rise up and sort of elevate consciousness with respect to this, elevate the profile of this issue, and make people deal with it, because it can't stay the same.
I know one of the issues that, in talking with some of my friends, male and female, military sexual trauma is a problem. And it's all about the power. Right now, one of the problems that I see is that it is handled at the most local level. So basically, if you have a problem with someone sexually harassing you, blackmailing you, assaulting you, rape, whatever, it goes to your chain of command first. Now, that doesn't make any sense if it is somebody in your direct chain of command who is doing the assaulting, the harassment, whatever. I know that there has been basically worked on the books to try to change that, but just like Mia said with the same thing with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, if it's still handled at the command level, the likelihood of anything changing anytime soon is gonna be nil. And I think what needs to be done since I am not a lawyer, nor do I pretend to play one, even though I'm wearing a bow tie thing. One of the suspenders, and the suspenders too. I think one of the things that needs to be done is, in addition to, we can train all day on this. You know right from wrong. If this is something that you wouldn't do to your sister, your aunt, your grandma, your mother, then you should not do it to someone else. But unfortunately, you have people in these positions of power who want to take advantage of those that are vulnerable. And what needs to be done is, when this happens, the punishment needs to be equal for everybody. I don't care if it's a male that does it, male on male, female on female, female on male, male on female. There needs to be repercussions. There needs to be actions that are taken, so when this type of thing happens, that the folks won't be afraid to speak up, make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. And I know the other side of this coin is, what about those poor men that basically they've had their lives destroyed by a woman making a false accusation? Somebody had basically the amount of false accusations that have actually come up, and the amount is so minuscule that it shouldn't even be, your breath should not even be wasted on it. Believe the women. We're not trying to get extra attention for saying, hey, you know what, my sergeant assaulted me, or this happened to me, or that happened to me. In my instance, when under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the guys that I knew that I thought were friends of mine blackmailing me, I basically had to weigh my options. Okay, which is the worst evil? Me getting kicked out, or me having to deal with this, being coerced into doing something I didn't want to do? And that's a rough decision to make. Should I even have had to make that decision? No. So, the thing is, it's gonna take all of you fine folks in this room to make sure that there's some laws changed, that there's some things to get done to make it better for not just the folks serving in uniform, because that trauma, that the ACE will keep on following that person, and that's something that, the VA is basically gonna be, and us as taxpayers are gonna be paying for. So why not prevent this to ensure that this isn't something that is still gonna be burdening us for the rest of our lives, and even going down to our children?
I think everybody can be role models. Men and women can be role models in terms of standing up for what's right and just living their life for the benefit of others. Because what we're really seeing is whole cultures where this was condoned, where people felt that this power disparity gave them the impunity to do whatever they wanted without any kind of punishment or even any kind of exposure. And I just think that it's not something that you can do with training. You can train people all day and that might not change their attitudes or their behavior. They may be more well-informed and maybe even more aware, but that may not change what they think is right and what's wrong until they have some real peer pressure from the people around them, the role models out there, the people that we can look up to, have a standard of behavior that is defensible. And it's not the kind of thing that we see, and it certainly is the kind of thing we laugh off that boys will be boys or whatever. That somehow you stand up and say, no, actually, no, none of that, none of this bullying stuff, taking advantage of a position of power and power disparity is something that is immoral, inherently immoral, to take advantage of somebody because you're stronger than them. So there's a lot of things that are just basic principles of role modeling that I think every single person here can actually elevate the profile of the issue, make it something you can talk about. Make yourself open to people talking about their trauma and the injustices that have been perpetrated against them. I think that it makes it all better. I think that you all have a role in doing that.
We're gonna get kicked out of this room, but you want to have
It starts in the military, and it needs to start there, because you take a look at the Pentagon, and the roles of leadership are predominantly male, and also needs to be more diversified in general in terms of people of color. And I'll end with this. I do feel that there's hope. I do believe there's hope in the new generation, because I take a look at my kids, my daughter who's 17, about to go to college, and my son who's 10, and he's like, why is he a judge? Why is this even happening? And, you know, little guys like that in our new generation, growing up and saying, no, this will not stand, this is not gonna be tolerated. I do see things will change for our new generation. For me, I do see hope, and creating awareness and panels like this, so thank you for being here.
Let's take our